Natasha, great to have you here on Outsiders. Been very keen to get you on. Let's first go to Iran and the attacks this morning on Israel before we get into the questions of that I'd like to put to you about UNRWA and about Australia kind of flirting with recognising Palestine, this sort of thing. But just quickly, your thoughts on what is happening in Israel right now.
It's very good to be with you. Firstly, may I extend my condolences to everyone who's been affected by the stabbing attack in Sydney and Bondi. I know we've been watching from the UK with great concern at those developments, and certainly those who have been injured and killed and their families. What we've been seeing, of course, in the last few hours developing, I think, tells us two things. First, this is certainly Iran escalating this issue into a regional conflict. But the second real significant takeaway is that the Israeli defensive technology that has been on display, certainly with respect to the first wave of drones and ballistic missiles that we have seen, has proved itself to be extraordinary. We're very familiar with the Iron Dome defensive missile system that deals with shorter range rockets, but what we have seen on display this evening, by all accounts, has been the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 programs as well. It seems as David Sling. And in terms of at least this first wave of an extraordinary development, Iran launching an attack on Israeli sovereign territory itself, not using, of course, its proxies that it has over the last 6 months been utilizing to attack Israel. Of course, Hezbollah from Lebanon, Hamas from Gaza, and also more widely, we've been seeing the influence of the Houthis in Yemen. This significant escalation so far seems only to have caused one casualty, a tragedy, a severely injured 10-year-old girl from the Bedouin community in the south. But so far, it does seem that Israel is successfully repelling this attack with extraordinary technology that we've seen on display.
Now, Natasha, you're a lawyer and you've looked in great depth into all the various attacks on Israel, such as the South African, the ICJ thing and all of that. But what I want to ask you about is Australia. And the Australian government has refinanced UNRWA. It has taken a number of measures. It's called for or flirted with the idea of recognition of Palestine without any kind of, just go ahead and recognise Palestine. We've also seen Australia sending an envoy to investigate the tragic WCK aid workers' deaths. Now, you don't normally send envoys to investigate your allies. So give us your thoughts on what is Australia doing? What's your take on the Australian government? And what are they up to?
Well, unfortunately, these steps are not Australia's alone. And I think it can very significantly be linked to the extreme escalation that we've seen this evening. Over here from London, in the early hours of the morning at your end. The rhetoric that we have also seen coming out of the United States seems that liberal democracies are turning their back on Israel, despite the fact that Israel is very much fighting our war, that in defense of liberal democracies and the values that we hold dear, both in Australia, in the UK, in the US, and the increasing rhetoric that we have seen in support, one may say, of the terrorist proxies that Iran has been deploying is deeply concerning. And I think I certainly hear the arguments that many have been raising that this is what has triggered the Iranians to consider such an explosive escalation to be something that they would undertake. Certainly the investigation into the World Central Kitchen tragedy is something Israel launched very quickly. It conducted an independent investigation in that the retired officers that were in charge of it were outside of the chain of command. And in that respect, in fact, Israel did something that I don't think we've seen other militaries conduct. When I think about recent strikes perhaps conducted by the US, most notably that in 2021 in Kabul, a drone strike which killed an aid worker and his family. The response by the Americans was very, very different to the immediate apology that we had from Israel, the acknowledgement of responsibility, and a decided effort to learn from mistakes. And that is, of course, testament to the fact that Israel does not target civilians. And so many military and legal experts, some of them with experience on the ground, have repeatedly said that Israel goes far above the requirements of international law and, in fact, the practices of most other law-abiding armies around the world in ensuring that civilians and aid workers and other non-military targets are kept safe to the utmost of its ability. And the measures that are adopted. Yes.
Your group provides legal support to victims of anti-Semitism. It's one thing to deal with individuals who may be anti-Semitic, but how do you deal with institutional anti-Semitism? Because we actually are seeing that not just at universities, but you could argue from segments of the media, the BBC, and even segments of the Democrats with the Squad and a virulently anti-Israel sentiment there. So how do you deal with that rise?
Yes, and unfortunately also the international organisations, including UNRWA and other UN bodies, as have already been mentioned. The difficulty here, I think, is in identifying and being clear when we identify the modern manifestation of anti-Semitism as it targets the Jewish state. And we see this manifested in modern blood libels and falsehoods that are propagated against Israel, I'm sorry to say, even in otherwise respected and respectable international institutions and across increasingly international legal institutions. And one of the roles that UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust embraces, in addition to providing support for victims of anti-Semitism, is to try and educate on these issues, especially as far as international law is concerned. Because so often, especially in the international legal arena, we're seeing an abuse of law, an inversion of the real international law and a misapplication of it. And that is a threat, I would say, not just to Israel, as we have been seeing develop over the last 6 months, including in the attacks by South Africa at the International Court of Justice. It seems very much on behalf of the internationally prescribed terrorist organization Hamas, but also the impact of the devaluing of international law and of international legal institutions like the International Court of Justice. That has a significant impact, I would say, for international law more broadly, and for all states, Australia, the UK included, that value the rule of law and that set store by being law-abiding themselves. And in that respect, this modern manifestation of anti-Semitism is something that really needs to be tackled head-on.
Thank you so much, Natasha. We're going to have to leave it there. We could chat about so much more, and we will do in the future. Thanks so much.